Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication guy. Again, having a conversation with a business communication professional so that you and I can get tips and strategies which will boost our business. Delighted today to host Tom Bradshaw, who's joining us from Alberta, Canada. He's an experienced, enthusiastic, versatile, and resourceful professional with proven interpersonal and organizational skills. Tom has a strong passion for public speaking and community development, which he shares through training, teaching, mentoring, community service, and coaching. Additionally, Tom has gained wide recognition as a creative problem solver. So please join me as I welcome Tom Bradshaw. Hello, Tom.
Hey, Bill. It's great to be here.
Super to have you. And I noticed in the material that I was using to introduce you, I noticed your interest in and commitment to public speaking, both doing it and coaching it and teaching it. So I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners will be too. What is it that initially sparked your interest in public speaking?
Well, it's interesting, Bill. I was an actor who was transitioning. I achieved my master's degree. I was doing some coaching, and one of the great mentors in my life, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Walter Kaza, was a speech coach, and he's the one who got me involved in professional speaking. But one of the first things I did was go out and do some research. So I went to every convention that I could and just listened to the speakers. And the first thing that I noticed was there's a lot of speakers who need coaching. It's either there's some sort of quality in their voice, but even sometimes the way they were planning their presentations just wasn't working in a communication process.
And you're talking about not just amateurs, but even professional speakers needed coaching and guidance on how to get better.
These were professional speakers who were making a living doing this, but there's a difference between being comfortable and being good. And so I started then to notice as I was listening to especially the speakers that were involved with entrepreneurial work, that they were giving great advice. But the key thing that they were all missing was that to implement this advice, you need to be good at communication. So right away, I saw, a niche for myself that this is great education, but unless you can have great communication skills, you really can't implement this work. And then I've always had this fascination with the human voice and how we communicate as speakers, how we can influence people with our voices, and how we can get them to take action. There's very little difference between an actor on a stage communicating ideas, thoughts, and emotions to the audience. It's the exact same thing with the speaker on stage.
Yes, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you put so much emphasis on the voice. I call the voice our audible fingerprint because it is so distinct for each one of us. And you've had the experience, Tom, as our viewers and our podcast listeners have had, of having someone call you on the phone that you haven't talked with in years, maybe an old college or a high school chum, and they start to tell you their name, but even before they finish, you know who they are
Yeah.
because the voice is, as I say, it's our audible fingerprint. It's us. It's distinctive. And therefore, we need to make the most of it. So, the next question for me would be, what what do you do to help people with the vocal part of their presentations?
Well, I'm a Linklater based voice coach. So I come from the philosophy that we all have world class voices. It's just that they're not working properly. So there's a lot of stress or tension that can be held in the vocal tract, which can be causing issues. They can be imbalances in resonating chambers. One of the issues, I don't know about where you're located down in the United States, but up here in Canada, especially with our weather, people get a lot of colds. And so you will hear a lot of nasality up here in the province of Alberta, and people who just talk like this. And you really don't want to be trapped in a room listening to this voice for the next 45 minutes.
It's very grating, isn't it?
It is, and it will just start to annoy you. So, working on traits like that is one of the key things. Making sure that the voice is actually being used properly, that it's free of stress and tension. And you'll be amazed at how great the voice starts to become. But also looking at other issues such as speech clarity. If I can't understand what you're saying, the communication process just shuts down.
Clarity has to come first.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, when you're talking about tension in the voice or tension that a person is feeling, that gets to a topic that you and I have both helped people on. And that, of course, is stage fright,
Yeah.
which is maybe the most universal malady in the universe. So, what do you do to help people take control of their stage fright when you're coaching a client, Tom?
Glossophobia. I think it's on most scales of 1 to 10 of the things you least do. I think the fear of public speaking always ranks higher than the fear of death, which leads us to the question, if you're going to a funeral, would you rather be the speaker or the guest of honor? And for some people, it's a hard decision. But the first thing I try to talk to people about is when you're on stage and you're feeling those emotions, you're really not the best judge of what's truly going on. That the audience doesn't see the world the way that you do. So, for example, if you're on stage and you're nervous and you're blushing, you're standing on stage thinking, oh my God, they can see how nervous I am. But that's not what the audience sees. They look at you on stage, they see those glowing red cheeks, and they go, this person must be incredibly healthy. So the first thing we need to do is change the perception of what the communication process is really like. Second of all, it's some really good, solid, just advice that's out there. The first 30 seconds are going to be the most difficult. If you can get past the first 30 seconds, things usually become much better. You'll feel the stress starting to leave. So it's really important to be well prepared. As you well know, Bill, the more prepared a speaker is, the more confidence they have, and the less they're going to be dealing with such issues as stage fright.
Yes, the way I've always put it is the more preparation you have ahead of time, the less perspiration you'll have.
I'm going to steal that.
And that's okay. And you might give me credit, but go ahead and steal it anyway. Reflecting on what you've said about the speaker, whether they're professional or whether they're an executive speaking to their board or their employees, whoever it is, one of the things that is so valuable here would be and is getting that person on video.
Yeah.
Because I've had it many times myself where I would say, my gosh, that presentation just didn't go like I wanted it to. And here was a stumbling block here. And my gosh, I paused way too long there. And then when I get to see it on video, I notice, gee, that pause was just a second or so. We are really our own worst critics. And along with what you said, Tom, the advice that I give, and I've got a small book out, 25 ways to control your stage fright and become a highly confident speaker. And the number one tip I would say in those 25 of mine is that every one of us needs to change our view about audiences. Audiences don't want us to fail. Why?
No.
Because you and I have been in situations where you and I are in the audience, and all those speakers you heard that you found some flaws with, it's uncomfortable for the audience. You're pulling for the speaker. And so I have another phrase you might steal. I tell my clients that the audience, the people in the audience are not your critics. They're your cheerleaders. They want you to succeed. That's just a fact. Now, getting back to the accents you mentioned that Canadians might have a sort of nasal tone. I grew up I'm in Georgia now. I it's where I've lived for over 30 years. I lived in, I grew up in Mississippi, which is South Mississippi, as far south as you can get in the United States. And we had draws and we had phrases such as you all and y'all. And but the fortunate part for me was that I lived in 9 different states during my profession before I landed here. So when you're living in the Midwest, you begin to blend in. In fact, I noticed when my wife and I would go back home to visit in Mississippi when we lived, say, in Kansas. I remember our parents would say to us, "You've got it. You've lost your accent." But in 3 days, we were picking up some of the mannerisms that we've grown up with. It's natural that we tend to talk like those around us, don't we?
We certainly do, and there's some really fascinating research on the topic because, something like the international border between Canada and the United States, the regions where there, is even a city divided by the border, the residents on both sides of the border actually sound different. They're not picking up each other's accent. But it's true. You go somewhere else and you eventually will start to pick up the characteristics of the accent. One of the difficulties that I have is that if I'm speaking to someone with an Australian accent, for an example, within 5 minutes, I can be doing the accent and without without thinking about it. And sometimes people don't like that.
Well, one thing you and I have noticed, we're both on Clubhouse. In fact, that's how you and I got acquainted. And one of the factors that I have a challenge with is many times people with international languages that are native languages that are different from mine. I have to really tune in to pick those up.
Well, you and I are lucky because we're from this field. We can do that tuning in, and we can actually understand what's being shared with us in the conversation. But people who have, either a heavy regional dialect or have learned English as a second language have this issue with communication. And it's, with the clients that I've worked with, it's incredibly frustrating to be having, for example, a business conversation and to look at the person's face and understand that they're not understanding what you're saying. And it's frustrating for both sides. And the communication process is very difficult. And if your listener starts to get frustrated, they will just tune you out. So having clear speech, being able to, and there's nothing wrong with accents. Accents are wonderful and they draw us in. But it's having the clarity of speech so that I can understand exactly what you're saying and we can share in the communication process.
Well, I think you and I would agree that accents can be attractive because they're different. The problem, it becomes a problem when people are focusing so much on the accent that they don't focus on the meaning that the person's trying to get across. We have time for one more question, and this is so much fun. We'll have to do this again sometime, certainly. But one more question, Tom. I know that you and I both have had experience in acting. We haven't been to Hollywood. We haven't been in plays on television, but we've done a little bit of acting. In what ways do you think acting helps our communication training and development, say for business and professional life?
Well, I often say to my business clients, if you had taken a drama class in university, you wouldn't be paying me all this money now. But it's the situation of an actor going on stage and a speaker standing on the same stage and communicating with the audience has a lot of parallels. First of all, if you take that class in university, it's going to give you the experience of getting up on stage in front of other people. So things like the fear of public speaking will start to fade because this becomes a known situation for you. But then I would, draw people's attention to the parallels that if I'm an actor on stage doing a monologue and speaking to the audience, it's the exact same process as a speaker on stage communicating with the audience. And if I'm on stage as an actor doing a scene with another actor, it's a conversation. And it's the exact same type of conversation that you want to be having as a speaker with your audience. So the parallels between the two, they just go hand in hand. And I would recommend for even, professional speakers who have been doing this for a long time to, do what you and I have done and get that experience working as an actor. And it doesn't have to be professional acting. Community theater is great.
And one of the things I felt after uh, several years as a college student and then in community theater, and then I started doing a good bit of public speaking. I felt that the speaking was easier. Why? Because you weren't dependent on somebody else. Because when you're acting, if somebody else flubs a line, forgets a line, or just doesn't seem to be quite with it that night that you're on stage, but you have the show to yourself and you're not dependent on anybody else's activity. Tom, this has been fascinating. Appreciate it so much. Great to, and I would add here that some people who may be skeptical about Clubhouse and say, gee, I don't think I'm going to make any connections that way. You and I wouldn't be acquainted if it weren't for Clubhouse. And we're constantly expanding our network with, I think, top professional people, and so that's been a real benefit. I know people who have viewed our conversation and listened to it on podcast want your contact information, Tom. So please share that with us.
The best way to get in touch with me is through vcmastery.com. That's Virtual Conference Mastery. And right now we've launched a bunch of new programs, and you can talk to me for 20 minutes just to get some quick advice. We can have a 45-minute session, or if you're an executive who really needs to improve their skills and have that elite level, we can do everything from helping you to establish your set, lighting, sound, to working on the presentation, to working on the voice. So vcmastery.com is where people want to go.
Yes, and it has very versatile offerings, no doubt about that.
Certainly does.
And a true professional at the top, no
Very
doubt
true.
about that. And now that you've given your contact information, I'm happy to give mine. Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. And so logically, my website is B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. I invite you to go there, check my services for corporations and leaders. Give me a call so that we can discuss your communication problems and challenges, and I'll work with you to find solutions to them. Thanks again to Tom Bradshaw for being with us today, and thanks to all of you who joined us for the Biz Communication Show. Be with us again next week when I host a lively, informative, and beneficial conversation with a top professional. Again, the Biz Communication Show, I'm your host, Bill Lampton.